You're listening to What Brings You In, a weekly series featuring psychology talk with therapists Ryan and Carrie. Have something to say? Want your question answered? Visit ryananswers.com/podcast to get in touch.
So we're going to talk about mental health, mental fitness today. So when we talk about physical health, we just talked about this before we turned the mics on. So we'll just kind of rehash that convo. People know fitness, working out, exercising,
eating right,
getting good sleep. These are things that help you to be healthy. And if you're healthy, you avoid diseases like heart disease and, to some degree, cancer. You live longer, things like that. But when you ask about mental health, people will say, well, what does it mean to be mentally fit? And they'll say, well,
not to have depression,
not to be anxious, to be more mentally fit, you go to a therapist. And sort of, but that's like saying to be physically fit, you don't have heart disease and you go to your doctor and that sort of stuff. So we want to talk about what's the equivalent of exercising and sleeping and eating right, but for your mind.
Yeah.
So you talked about emotion and the role of that. So the most distilled way I think I can say it is to be physically fit is to be healthy, and to be working out, to be mentally fit is to have emotions that are proportional to what's happening in your life.
And having responsibility over those emotions, so you know where they come from, you know what to do with them.
Yes,
you're the boss of them, I would say.
Yeah, you own your feelings.
You own them.
That may sound a little foreign, but how many times? So if you're thinking, well, I already do that. How many times have you gone through your day and been like, why did I just do that?
Or I got angry because that you're not owning the emotion. You're saying that the emotion is the responsibility of this other person.
Like the amount of things that happen that are disproportionate. Maybe let's talk about that to give people some perspective. So if somebody cuts you off in traffic and you rage at them, you're flipping them off or yelling, or you're laying on your horn, it flusters you, you go home, you're aggravated.
You're not even doing any of that externally, but internally you're like boiling. You're still driving.
Oh yeah, even if you're not saying it, if you're feeling it.
But you're, right?
So think about, when we talk about proportionality, does that make sense? What is the actual impact? So ask yourself, what's the actual impact to my life? I am momentarily inconvenienced. I am...
have experienced a rude interchange of events.
Yeah, like somebody was a little inconsiderate towards me, but ultimately, like, what is the consequence? What is the effect? If it's a big effect, like a big anger, makes sense. But on the road, unless somebody almost causes an accident and potentially almost injures you and your family or something like that, it doesn't really make sense to get that angry. Like it's not a proportional response. Or being really overly critical of yourself. You get a 90 on a test and you're in tears because you didn't get the other 10%. Well, there's no real negative consequence to that. Yeah. Like a 90 is a damn good grade. Like you're in scholarship territory and you're definitely getting in wherever you want to go. You're not going to get cut from your classes. Like there's no real negative consequence. So if you're crying over that, or even like Carrie said, if you're not doing something outward but you just internally feel those things, that's a sign that something is probably a little bit off. Disproportionate. So emotions come from a very basic place, right?
They're hardwired into us as human beings.
Yes, we all have a basic ability to recognize certain types of emotions. So if you want to speak to that.
Feel them. So Ekman, this is a brilliant researcher that did tons of research in different areas of the world. He even went to like Stone Age countries that have no contact with Western civilization.
Yes. So he's talking uncontacted tribes and stuff like that. They're not socialized, they're not influenced by media, there's no education. So if there was ever a proving ground for Ekman's ideas,
that's it. I think the place was called Four. He went. And he found that if he videotaped these people and then went back to the States, I don't know what university he worked with, his students could recognize all those people's emotions, right? So that's weird, because if this group of people had no contact with Western civilization, no cultural parallels to us, they at least had to have different emotions, right? In theory.
So, or at least different ways of expressing them.
Nope, same way of expressing. And then he did the opposite, right? He'd bring pictures of people from the States and ask them what happened to this person for this person to have this face. And if it was like the sad face, the people would say he lost something he cares about. He lost a child, he lost a parent, right? So even the stimulus for the face was exactly the same as the stimulus would be here.
So the causes, meaning like the things that cause you to be sad, are the same type of things that would cause us to be sad.
Yeah. So he ended up concluding that there were 7 basic human emotions, and no matter where we go in the world, at any age, at any moment in time, we will recognize them. So it's sad, disgust, anger, joy, surprise, and fear.
I was surprised the most by disgust.
Yeah.
That would be it, because I never really considered that an emotion.
The facial expression is like wrinkling of the nose.
like the wrinkling of the nose and like the taking your
and
face.
there's two types of
back.
disgust, right? There's like this moral disgust when someone does something that you find disturbing.
It's almost like disapproval.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then the physical disgust of smelling something that's gross or
Right,
tasting
like bad
something that's
food,
gross. Yeah.
Whatever it is. Yeah. So when we talk about emotion and we talk about the fitness of that emotion, imagine any animal.
Mm-hmm.
You can see their feel. Like you can see a dog gets excited.
Yeah,
at certain things, right?
Lines.
Yeah, like you throw your stick for your dog, and you can see they have like an emotional compulsion to go and get it, and they're very excited about it, and they bring it back to you, and they're so pumped up to do that. That makes sense because fetching things is tied to survival for a dog, for certain breeds. Anyways, they're bred to have those traits. So humans are bred to have certain innate fears. So if you talk about the biggest fears that are kind of built into us, public speaking is one. And so you would go, let's talk about, is that proportional? Well, not really, not now
like
anyways,
heights, right?
because heights would make sense, but public speaking is one that you would think it doesn't make sense at face value. People aren't going to
die from public speaking
or do anything bad.
Their life is not at risk.
Give a speech, you're not going to get stoned to death if people don't like what you said, in most countries, anyways. But I would imagine for most of human existence, that might not be the case. If you have a small tribe of, say, a dozen people or something, and you stand up and make a daring proclamation, if they really don't like what you said, maybe you're out. Maybe they stop feeding you. Maybe they ostracize you, and then maybe you don't do so well. Maybe you don't survive. So we have these emotions that developed for many tens of thousands of years in an environment which is very different
from the one we're currently
the way we're currently in.
I think also because since we are responsible for our own emotions, I think that's part of being mentally fit, to know what you're feeling and why you're feeling it. We also find stimulus, like we find fear or we find a danger when something isn't a danger because of how I perceive it, right? So I can be sitting in front of a desk with a piece of paper in front of me with questions. That's reality. But I see it as a test, and if I fail this test, I won't approve the course. And if I don't approve the course, I won't finish the program. And if I don't finish the program, I won't ever get a job. And then, I am going to be a homeless person under a bridge because I will not succeed.
And then you're sitting there having test anxiety.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're having a panic attack.
Carrie is touching on what I would call nurture. So you've developed that line of thinking due to experiences in your life. Yeah. And what I was talking about is nature, these things that are kind of almost instinctual. So nurture plays a much bigger role than nature does, but both are worth mentioning. So what's an example of nurture? Let's say a parent who, no matter what you do, constantly criticizes you. So you do get that 90 on a test.
Where's the other 10%?
Where'd the other 10% go? How come you can't do this?
Harder.
Your brother got 95 and you're constantly made to feel less than as a result of your performance. You will develop an anxiety around performing. You may feel even that your sense of value as a person is linked to your ability to perform.
I also want to add, even in that example, there's two parts to it, right? So one is this parent that has this kind of dialogue, and then there's also this individual who starts believing the parent dialogue. Because there are situations where the parent can be very critical and the person just blows it off.
My parent's an asshole.
Yeah, and they're crazy and they don't develop that anxiety, right?
Yes.
And there's some of us that will probably believe what our parents say and then develop that anxiety.
Yeah, some of the highest performers I've ever worked with. Like I had a client who was a very brilliant doctor. He won a very prestigious type of award. And one of the things that really, when we dug into it, was driving him was a sense of his worth is linked to performance. Yeah. And I remember him telling me about the reception of this award and going back into the backstage area after and crying, and his wife feeling like he was crying with joy. And he revealed later that he was crying because he had essentially reached the pinnacle of his career, and he still didn't feel that hole. It wasn't resolved. He didn't feel good enough still, and that is what hit him in that moment. And he went, "Oh shit, it's never like, going to. What am I going to do? I'm never going to." And then there's a moment of kind of crisis of, "Am I going to feel this way forever? Is this just how I feel? I'm not going to be able to earn or achieve my way out of this." So that would be a really extreme example of a disproportionate emotional wiring system where
the same thing happens to a lot of us about people pleasing, right? So I'm
people
as
please is a good
valuable
one.
as
Yeah.
how much I am loved by others. So it's a sense of externalizing our own self-worth, which we were talking about. It's like then you're constantly fluctuating, because if your emotions are because of other people or other things, then you're at the mercy of these other people and these other
Right.
things.
So as your life goes up or down, you will go up and down with your life. So when we talk about being centered or balanced, that term is often used in a very kind of wooey, new agey kind of way of being, centered, woo,
Presence.
presence. But when we're talking about it here, and we're talking about it in the context of something very real. We're talking about how affected you are by the opinions and thoughts of other people. So if you are a people pleaser, you probably have a lot of trouble if people disapprove of you. And you may not even realize that.
Or even the imagined disapproval of people, because maybe the people around you won't say they disapprove of you, but you think that they could disapprove of you, so then you act based on that thought alone.
Yeah, a common symptom of anxiety is imagining that. So if you ever find yourself kind of playing out, especially combative scenarios in your head of arguing with somebody or what you'd say to them, or maybe you're in the shower having like a battle with, a colleague
Practicing
or something like that, or
Yeah.
whatever it is. Those are symptoms of anxieties and those doubts. So treat your emotions like signposts. Anytime you notice yourself having a high level of emotion, that's like a signpost pointing you, saying
I
something.
always say lighthouse.
Lighthouse is a good one too. Yeah, either way, it's something that guides you.
Yeah, it's good information, very valuable information about you.
Says, look here, pay attention in this area. But many people don't do that. Like you said, Carrie used the word externalizing. So just to touch on what that means, let's say I'm a very insecure person and I constantly feel like people are attacking me or criticizing me or against me or don't value me as much as other people. That would be an internal issue. But if I say, well, everybody's mean to me or nobody ever accepts me, that's external. I'm putting it on other people.
You're giving them the responsibility to make you feel better.
And that's the thing with blame is very, so externalizing, I would say, is almost synonymous with blame. And when you blame somebody, it does alleviate your sense of responsibility,
Momentarily.
but it also alleviates your sense of power,
Yeah.
because what you're saying is you do this.
And I don't want it to seem that then we have to always be, because some people think, if you're mentally fit, then you're just constantly stable, like nothing really shakes you. You don't feel sad, you don't feel angry, you're just kind of happy all the time. And that's not true, because when we talk about proportion, that means there will be moments in life where you have to be proportionally sad, and you have to be proportionally angry, and you have to be proportionally disappointed at yourself.
Or anxious. There's a big moment.
Yeah.
Like, so what we're talking about is not, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. We're not talking about this monk-like kind of
like robot, right? No.
robotic stability.
No.
We're talking about a proportional. If you have something very sad that happens and you get very sad, this is when somebody comes in and like, I'm not sure if I'm depressed. I'm like, well, what's going on in your life? Like, if you have a lot of stuff that's very stressful or very sad going on in your life, it makes total sense to me that you'd be very sad. We can talk about how to cope with that better, how to process these things, how to take ownership of your emotions. But to say that you shouldn't be feeling those things doesn't make sense. No.
Yeah. It's like if you were to tell me, let's say I get fired, and then I say fired, or I lost my dream, I've lost my dream job, it'd be insane that I'd be happy.
Yeah. That
right?
would be a disproportionate.
That'd be insane.
Yeah,
that
you can
would,
have that's a good point.
That's a problem.
You can have a positive reaction that is disproportionate and is not a sign of mental well-being.
What corresponds to that situation would be sad, angry, disappointed, frustrated, something. Nervous, scared.
A lot of things.
Not overjoy.
So another sign, and I found it to be more common in men. We talk about attachment a lot in our show. On our first episode and our second, talking about the Love is Blind series, we talk about these ideas that people are avoidant or preoccupied at the extremes of emotional processing, meaning avoidant people do not really process, and emotional ups and downs are not very much a part of their lives. They bottle it, they sweep it under the rug. Those phrases come up a lot. So those people may be hearing this and thinking, well, I'm very mentally stable. I'm very mentally fit and healthy. Because they think they're stoic. Yeah, because they're stoic and we don't really show emotion or whatever the case is. That's also a sign of something, again, proportion. It is. It makes sense and is proportional to have emotional highs and lows. So if you're very flat, that's another symptom. It could be pointing to something. Why aren't you feeling as much? What is blocking you? Sometimes this happens after people go through trauma. Think of it like a fuse box, right? There's too much charge, the fuse blows, and it just stops transmitting information because it's just too much. Other times it's from people who are instructed or taught not to do that. You grew up in a family that
doesn't talk about emotions or feelings.
They don't talk about emotions or feelings, or if you try to, you are punished, and maybe not directly like grounded, but I mean, they may withdraw from you. They may criticize you or shame you or say, why are you whining? Man up, deal with it. That sort of language. And
I don't have time for this.
Yeah, I don't have time for this. Why are you always causing trouble?
Yeah.
Like, why can't
You're
you
so
be
sensitive.
more like your sister, your brother? You're so sensitive. Yeah, it's a big one for men. It's used to shame them out of emotions. You're too sensitive. Why are you so crazy?
Well, that's it. That one's used a lot on women.
That's true.
So dramatic.
Yeah, dramatic. Yeah, men use that a lot in session. Oh, the eye rolls. Even if you're not saying these things, again, you can feel when somebody doesn't validate your emotions.
And remember, language and communication, 60% of it is nonverbal. So tone of voice, eye contact,
how you sit,
and what you do with your hands and your face and your body when you're listening to someone.
If somebody's expressing something deeply painful, like if your partner's telling you, let's say we're working on a case of infidelity, and the one partner is sitting there saying to the other, I am shattered by this, and they're going on about how hurt they are and how betrayed they feel, and the other person's just rolling their eyes going like, I didn't even sleep with them. Like, why are you?
Yeah.
That's one of those things where now that's a roadblock. That person will not heal until there is some kind of give and take there.
Unless they understand.
Yeah.
Human beings will not change until they feel understood.
And that goes for internal change as well.
Until I understand what's going on.
Here's a benchmark that I use, because there are many times in which even when you're doing these things, even when you're checking your emotions, you're going, is this proportional? You can still miss stuff because you are so accustomed to whatever you've been taught as a baseline. Like if you're taught in a family of not talking about emotions, not speaking about emotions, you may feel not having a response is totally normal. Yeah. So a good way to circumvent your blind spots is a kind of a trick is to think about how other people would treat their friends or how other people in different families would do that. It can give you some perspective.
So or if you would say that same thing to a friend.
Yeah, so if you're in your head beating up yourself,
would you say that?
Would you say that to your friend, or if somebody else said it to your friend, would you defend them? Would you feel like you have to stick up for them?
I also think another way to check our blind spot is to ask our loved ones. It's a scary conversation.
Marriage is great for that.
Yeah, but I did it once. Part of a homework assignment in one of my graduate classes was to ask 3 key family members, what about my experience with you and my way I react to you is hurtful, harmful, or just annoying? And my 3 family members answered the same thing.
Oh, I'm so curious. What is it?
They answered the same thing. They say that I think I'm always right and that I am too persistent.
That's interesting.
So in my mind, one of my sisters that I asked once getting married is married, and she was maybe a year married. So I'd ask her constantly, when am I having a nephew? I did it out of love, but I just really wanted a nephew. She's like, that, for example, Carrie, you're too pushy. I was like, I just thought it was a question. Yeah, but I hear it as something that's pushy.
Right.
So,
okay, that's another really good road to go down is the way you feel or the way you think about the message you're delivering.
It's not always the way it's received.
And the way it's received matters. You can't just say, well, I'm sorry you felt that way.
It matters if you care about the person.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you care about the person in front of you, then it doesn't matter how they hear.
Yeah, because if you don't care about the person, then you can just be like, well, your perspective's dumb. I don't care about you. Goodbye. Yeah. But the problem is many people take this approach in marriage. It's, again, very common with men being like, well, I'm sorry that you're so sensitive. Well, that's not going to get you.
If you care about me, it doesn't matter. Because you're not talking to a Jane Doe, right? You're talking to me. Spouse. So if I am too sensitive, fine.
But you're married to me.
So
you have to play ball with me. And if you think I'm too sensitive, your options are like adjust, adapt, and work with me and make some change on your end, and I'll make some change on my end. Yes. Compromise. Or I don't want to deal with this. I don't like you as a partner, and I think that we should go our separate ways. Yeah. Both are totally valid. Yep. But one thing that it is valid, but the one thing I would advise against is just staying in that scenario and being super unhappy. At the very least, I'm not saying like break up or don't break up. All I'm saying is if you're in that scenario,
try to grow,
doing nothing
try to make happy.
Is generally not going to lead you to a good place.
No, it'll probably lead you to a worse place.
Yeah.
And
so
I say probably just to be in there of caution instead of just saying it will lead you to it.
Like to be blunt, like 99.9%
99.9%
you're not going anywhere positive. So reception matters to people who matter to you. And if you take an approach of, I'm sorry you felt that way, or blaming them for the way it's received rather than taking ownership that the way you say it matters, then you're going to cause distance in that relationship.
And also, we have to accept as human beings that we have limitations, right? So if I get upset, even a little bit of little bit upset, that's going to change my blood way, like how my blood pressure is going. It's going to change my heartbeat. It's going to change the way I sweat. It will change my vocal cords. The muscles in my throat will change. So my tone of voice could be different than what I think it is, because I'm not even realizing I'm getting upset.
One thing that I do, I have a pulse oximeter. I have 2 of them, and they're set to an alarm at 90 beats a minute. So if a couple is especially really difficult, and I have a lot of trouble helping them to regulate and recognize their own symptoms, like we're talking about proportionality, to help them recognize what it feels like to be at a point where you're no longer communicating effectively, I'll have them both put on the pulse oximeter.
And there'll always be.
And as soon as like the beep, 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 beep goes off, they know, okay, so what I'm feeling right now, this is when I need to do some kind of skill, and then I'll teach them how to regulate or calm down or intervene in some way. So I have also asked the same thing.
Yeah?
Yes. Well, not quite the same way. Okay, not at all the same way. My wife was just telling me, this is what you do wrong.
Because it was one of the worst homework assignments I've ever had. I would have never done it if, let's say, maybe.
Yeah, no, it wasn't something I really did willingly, but I got the message.
Yes.
And afterwards, I asked people to confirm it for me. And they're like, 100%. Like, how are you in your profession? Did you not recognize that immediately about yourself? Like, you're way too arrogant and you're super condescending. And I'm like, shit.
That's pretty similar to mine. You're always right and you're pushy.
I know. I'm surprised we don't butt heads more based off of that. But I took that into account, and I started trying to check myself. And this is like a really difficult thing to do.
It's
just
hard.
To make sure people don't think I'm talking about this as if this type of self-development is easy. It is not.
No. And it's not always successful, right? Like, I'll have road bumps where I'm, again, pushy. And
of course. It's something you constantly have to, it's like a feature of yourself that you try to mitigate. So I find myself, I will draw on my experience here, and I'll try to explain what's going on in the midst of an argument. So I go from a participant of the argument
to an observer,
dispute, to an observer or a kind of narrator of it almost, which is a form of contempt. That's what you do when you think you're smarter than other people, or to be defensive. So I did recognize myself doing that, and it's really annoying to me personally because I know that I'm doing it and I hate that I'm doing it.
But then it's hard to stop.
It is hard to stop because then you have to essentially have a moment of shame or at least for me, shame or embarrassment where I feel defeated or I feel less than. Like, it's really difficult to have those moments where you go, okay, I'm just being a dick because I don't want to be wrong and I feel stupid for what I did, and admitting that just makes me feel really shamed.
Yeah, it's so hard to do that.
But when you do that, a very interesting thing happens. The
person comes in.
The walls drop, and that's where moments of connection happen. Yeah. So there is a lot of benefit to doing this, but it's very tricky to do. Yeah. And your spouse, your family members, close friends will probably be more than happy to tell you if you want to ask
enjoy
them.
it.
Yeah, they'll probably
finally you're asking me this,
And if you've heard things, you've probably heard them in anger. So this is another point I just want to touch on in terms of communication is there's the message, which can be said 1,000 different ways. And the way you say it is like the packaging. So a lot of times people will deliver very good messages and very bad packaging. Yeah. So if you throw a little kernel of truth at somebody, but it's in a little bomb and it hurts them, it blows up on them, they're not going to, no matter how accurate you are,
I think we talked about this. If I see angry, but what you want is for me to say I love you, you're not going to get I love you when you're yelling at me.
Like, and that's a preoccupied feature, right?
No way.
Those stormy people in our sessions.
And if we're talking about mental fit, I think that's another indication of being mentally fit, being able to carry long relationships that are very satisfying. So interpersonal connection with more than one person, with two people, whatever, is also a sign of being mentally fit.
I would say so. Yeah, it's a metric. But in terms of what you do and how do you get there, analyzing why your relationships fail. That's a big one. We often see people after, many failed relationships for similar reasons. They will come in and be like, look, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I kind of come here humbled before you going, I want help.
Yeah.
I don't want to do this.
I don't want to be like this.
Yeah. So when do you start trying to be more mentally fit? Do you wait until you have some kind of disease? Like we're talking about physically fit. You can wait and you can eat like crap and not take care of yourself and not exercise and get a heart attack and then go to therapy. So the equivalent of that is when couples call us and say, I'm about to divorce my spouse And
I'm already out.
Counseling is the last step. I hate him, but I want to see if counseling helps.
Yeah.
And you go like, well,
yeah, but it's harder
it's
for them.
way harder.
It's way harder.
The
for
same
them.
way as if you are morbidly overweight and you have diabetes and you have, you know, you just had a bypass surgery. Like getting fit from that position is
it's
a much
hard.
longer road. If you start it earlier, it's easier. So what are some symptoms? I'll throw a couple out there that would motivate somebody to go to therapy. So I would say, number one, do not wait to crisis. Wait until discomfort. So if you feel uncomfortable being vulnerable or opening up in relationships, you feel claustrophobic by your spouse or your partner.
You feel trapped.
You feel trapped. If
Chained.
you have difficulty keeping composure in disagreements.
In hard conversations.
Yeah, if you feel yourself, you get heated
if
or you get
feel
nasty.
like a match, right? Like if
you go boom.
Boom.
And you attack or you regret things that you say. That's one. If you are disproportionately stressed, like there's no reason why you should have a meltdown if your kids leave shoes in front of the door and you walk in, you trip over them. Like, yeah, it's annoying, but if you're going in, you're screaming, there's something else going on. That is not a proportionate response.
Yeah.
If you are generally not happy, I'm not talking depressed. I'm just saying,
like unsatisfied with life, right? Like
dissatisfied.
So, or if you feel like you're surviving, like if you're just doing the day to day to get by, if you're coasting, then that's also a sign of maybe. But I think those are warning signs of you're starting to get sick. So it's like the flu. Yeah. Right? So you're not like heart attack, depression, right? Panic attacks.
It's like a common cold.
But it's a common cold.
I think
you could take a step back and be like, how much do I know myself? What are my wants? What are my needs? What are my desires? What are my 3 basic flaws?
Yeah. How aware are you? Like people talk about having relationships with other people and they have kind of a general idea of how to do that. You have to treat them nicely. You have to take care of them. You have to spend time with them. That goes for yourself as well. Everybody has a relationship with themselves, which may sound a little strange, but you do.
We do. We're with ourselves
You
all
talk
the
to
time.
yourself mentally. You have a dialogue with yourself. You take care of yourself or not. Do you make commitments to yourself? That's a really common one where people will keep commitments to others but break them to themselves. Like, what does that say about how much you value or respect yourself? And what are the consequences of that?
Yeah, for sure.
So those types of things. But
how much you can say no to yourself too, right? Like if
discipline, boundaries. Yeah, that's a really good one. So much like you can go to the gym without needing any of those symptoms. Like I think Carrie's correct. What I was talking about is kind of like these are the earliest signs,
like the common colds.
You go and you go, okay, I should go and just talk to somebody. But I mean, like earlier, before my rock climbing incident, I had another very, very mild injury. And so I decided to go to physiotherapy. I'd never been before. And I thought, much like people who come to therapy for the first time when there's not a crisis in their life, I'm probably not going to get much out of this. If we're being honest, a lot of people think that. I don't go to therapy unless I'm in crisis because I'm not going to get much out of it. So I go in and I'm talking to my physiotherapist and she's asking me what I do in the gym. I'm talking about, bench, squat, deads, like the big lifts. And she's like, okay, well, let's just watch you do those. And so I'm doing those and she's like, ooh. I'm like,
what's wrong? What's going on?
Ooh? I know that ooh. I do that in my head sometimes when I'm talking to people. And she starts walking around looking at me from different angles. And I'm like trying to be as perfect as I can be because I don't want to be criticized.
Performance anxiety.
Totally. And she's like, okay, well, this is happening. You're doing this. You're doing that. And I'm going like, wow. So I was doing a lot wrong without really suffering major consequences.
Yeah.
It was actually I just wasn't getting major benefits. So if you come to therapy, you can be more happy. Yeah. You can be more in touch. You can be more communicative. You can pick up a lot of skills even if you don't have something wrong. So therapy is typically
I don't think maybe our couples have something wrong in their relationship, but I don't think that people who have to come to therapy have to have something wrong, right?
Well, the vast majority of people I've seen in my career, I have seen thousands and thousands of people, literally, and I would say maybe 100 or 200 of them actually have clinical issues that are pathological. They can be diagnosed by, say, a clinical psychologist.
And they need medication, right?
Most of them, though, are people who individually are very healthy people, pretty fit, but in a relationship, they struggle. So I think many people view therapy as a way to prevent or remove negatives. Like I'm in pain and I want to stop being in pain, rather
like symptom
than
management.
Positives. Like I want to be better at communicating, which most of my time is actually spent doing that. I mean, with couples, you want to remove the negative stuff, but you also have to teach them skills. But if they weren't in a relationship and having a crisis in their relationship, they probably wouldn't pick up those skills. No. Couples therapy helps you a lot in that way.
Along with skills, I try to put moments of connection. So I always leave a homework assignment that will generate more positive interactions. within the relationship and even within myself, right? So acknowledging that I did
learn a lot from
something,
clients too.
right? Acknowledge that I did something right. Give yourself a compliment when you think you're doing well. Acknowledge that you're trying.
That's rare, isn't it? I'm definitely, despite all the time I've been doing this in our conversations, I am much more prone to criticizing myself than I am to pumping my own tires.
Yeah.
Like, I don't leave here and go, "You're the fucking best." I don't do that, but I would walk out and be like, "Dude, that was awful." And then I have to check myself and go, "Well, hang on a minute," right? Same with a good way to check and have a balance on that same line of thinking is anxiety. What if this goes wrong? What if it goes right? What if this doesn't work? What if it does?
Or even if you have anxiety, I always ask myself when I get anxious, what's the worst thing that can happen?
Yeah.
Right? And then check your fear. Is your fear proportional to the situation? Yep. So in the test, is it proportional? What am I fearing? I'm going to be a homeless person on the bridge. Really? This test is going to define I'm going to be homeless under the bridge?
Exactly. And I mean, even like I've talked to you before about when I first tried starting a business, and one of the things that allowed me to move forward with that, despite not having any training or knowledge about how business works, was the worst outcome is I have to move in with my mom.
Yeah.
That is what happened. And it was uncomfortable being, in my early 20s and having like a serious girlfriend and living with my mom. But like, we made it.
Yeah, you survive. Okay.
So you can look at your goals or what you want to do. Because a lot of people don't do stuff because of that. They're like, because I can't. I have bills to pay or whatever. A common one we see is when we have entrepreneurs in a relationship and their partners are asking for more of their time, they immediately often get defensive and go, "Well, if I don't answer the phone, the bills don't get paid." I'm like, "Well, if you don't answer the phone within these certain hours, your bills are still going to get paid.
Just
maybe you get back to that person
a little later. And
maybe, yes, you do lose a small percentage of people, but that's the trade-off for having a much more satisfying relationship and an engaged partner who is connected to you, who you're happy with.
And you'll probably do better in business.
Present. Yeah, they pay us. But many people are so not checking themselves. They're not doing these things.
They don't even realize that they're doing this.
They're not very mentally fit. They're very rigid. That's actually another one, is rigidity in thinking. If you come in
no
here
adaptability,
and you're like, I tell it like it is, I shoot straight, I tell people, and they maybe interrupt a partner, say that's not what happened, don't lie to this person. I've had people do that, where they're kind of putting a finger in the partner's face, going like, don't you,
or going like, ah.
Yeah, and you have to fight with them to please stop interrupting, please give them the opportunity to speak, or even flipping it and doing it exploratively, like, why is it so urgent that you do not allow them their perspective? What happens if they have a perspective?
What happens if you don't tell me what you want to tell me right now?
Yeah. What if you tell me
what are you scared of?
A few minutes, what might happen? And so these are great questions to ask yourself if you have any of these issues. So these are many tips for mental fitness. I mean, this is by no means comprehensive.
No.
But it's a good starting point. So
it's a good thing to check. Proportionality.
Being kind to yourself. Comparing your relationship with yourself to your relationship with others.
Yes.
Asking yourself if you would treat other people the same.
The way you're treating yourself.
Loved ones would treat you the same. Asking if you're too disconnected. So maybe you're saying, I don't have disproportionate highs or lows.
How engaged am I with people?
Absence. How are your relationships with people? Are you close with people? And when you're considering therapy, ask yourself, can I benefit from it? Should I just go and try a session out versus should I wait for catastrophe? Crisis. Because I mean, I don't think I know anybody who, I mean, I can't see people I know, obviously, but if I could, I think all of them would gain at least something from a session.
At least in my training, all of us had to go to therapy to be able to graduate. And I went in there thinking, really?
Me too. That was arrogance and condescension, right? I walked in,
I don't have that much issue. I'm
smarter than this person. I'm going to sit here and talk circles around them.
I did therapy when I was a kid. My mom took me. I'm good after that. And I learned so much. Just because I didn't have that emotional intensity of being in a crisis, I was able to be much more curious about my own experience.
I was very surprised. That was the number one thing, is I decided to be very honest and just say, you know what? I think this is a waste of time. I don't think I need to be talking to you. I think I know everything I need to know. And thinking back, I'm like, oh, it's such a cringy attitude. That's so bad. Right? That's
how we are. That's how we are.
But the thing is, you have to be open to that. And I look back with judgment now, which, I mean, is somewhat normal. But you have to also be compassionate. When I look back at myself then, I didn't have the emotional capacity to handle criticism the way I do now. I was young. I was like 20 years old. It's totally normal to be, I know if you're listening to this in your early 20s, you probably feel very old and mature. but you're going to change a lot.
Yes.
And I'm sure from like 32 to 40, you're always growing. There's no end to
Hopefully.
this, okay? Hopefully. Yeah, so I'm not sitting here saying I have reached some pinnacle. My journey is very much still in progress. I'm sure I'll look back at things I've done now with the same attitude that I do.
When I look back at 20s,
anything else you want to add? I feel like it was a really smooth episode.
So we have. I just want to give a checklist. So how can I check if I'm mentally fit? 1, you know what you're feeling.
Yes.
2, it's proportional. We talked about that. That's proportional to the stimulus. 3, we talked about checking your relationships to see how steady, how satisfying, how engaged they are. Your relationship with yourself, how you treat yourself versus how you would treat others, right? And then, do we mention anything else, just so that our listeners can have a good idea?
I think maybe the activity level of your check-ins. So are you aware of what's going on? Like this things Carrie just mentioned. How often is that happening? Like think of that as kind of like your gym. Are you going to the gym once a month?
Yeah. Do I check in with myself? How am I feeling? What am I thinking? Right? What am I doing? What are my wants? What are my needs?
Yeah. Why do I do what I do?
Yeah. What I do.
So if you have any questions or comments.
There's also a great question I've read one place that I always ask myself that maybe it'll be valuable to some people that are listening to us. If you had to redo your life, if you had to do today again, would you be excited about it? Would you be nervous about it? What would you feel about repeating today? And the person asked this is Yalom, and he asked about your life, right? Like if you had to live your life,
my favorite guy.
right? If you had to live your life again, what would you feel? Because immediately, and if I asked that of clients, they're like a gasp because they wouldn't, or they smile and be like, yeah, I'm happy. And I think that's a good check-in to see how you're doing in general in your life. Am I satisfied with my life? Am I living a life that
I'm now currently doing that as you're saying this. I feel pretty good. Genuinely, I feel pretty good. I don't know if I always would have said that. There's definitely some periods in my life where depending on when you have asked me, so it's okay if that answer changes.
Of course.
You don't always have to.
And I think that the answer is valuable because if you say no, then great. Now you have something to do about it, right?
Yeah. And that's that ownership component, right? If you're able to take ownership, I think is a really big one. If you're very defensive or you find difficulty taking ownership, you lose so much opportunity to connect with people. You can't know yourself either. Yeah. So to qualify that, because again, that sounds like something that can be used in a very, what is that?
Mystic kind of. Love yourself before you love others.
Out there. So when I talk about knowing yourself, we're talking about what Carrie's saying. Do you know why you do what you do? Are you aware of why you react to people in certain ways? Why you seek out certain things? Why you attract the people or choose the people that you do? Right? Because people say, why do I keep attracting these people? I'm like, well, toxic people, they aren't picky. They go to everybody. If they have toxic people in your life, it's because you're allowing them to be there and other people aren't. So why? Boundaries, right? Boundaries is a good one.
Boundaries, yeah.
What do you accept in your life? What kind of treatment do you accept? And what does that say about you?
Boundaries even with yourself. If you decide to go on a diet, if you decided to do exercise, if you decided not to drink more than 3, like, are you able to keep those things to yourself?
Yeah, you keep commitments. That's a pretty good one.
Yeah.
So there's probably a lot more we can talk about. And I mean, if you have feedback on this episode, ryananswers.com/podcast for the show notes. You can post questions and comments there. We'd love to hear from you guys. Anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. Thank you very much for listening. Carrie and I are in here every Thursday.
Thanks.